Yes, I first joined the British Army in the Parachute Regiment as a direct enlistment on the 10th of June 1959. I was with them for 7 months, but due to injury sustained in my left knee by an accidental bayonet jab, caused a few problems. The thing was that we were in recruit training, and I'd gone to what was then Sandy's Soldiers' Home in Maida Barracks in Aldershot, for a cup of coffee and a chow and what, call it what you will. And on the way back, what I didn't know was that one of the other idiots was throwing a big stick of bayonet at the door. And I actually walked through the door. As it left his hand, he saw the door opening and tried to stop it. And at the time, he got the worst injury because it opened up his hand. It caught him across his hand like this, and he ended up with several stitches. But he knocked it in a downward flight and it hit me in the knee. Now, the wound itself was very, very minor. So minor, it didn't even need a stitch. So I kept my mouth shut, but it infected. And eventually I ended up in Cambridge Military Hospital in Aldershot for nearly a month, having my leg drained of poison. And of course, when I got back, they said, you've got a weak point, you're not being allowed to carry on. And I was all right for ordinary soldiering, and I could go where I wanted because I was a regular, They said, you know, if there's a vacancy, you can go. I then went to the 90 Fusiliers in the depot at Bury, here in Lancashire, thinking that because I lived at Hollingworth Lake near Rochdale, if I could get on the permanent staff, I could be home most weekends, and that was it. And that was in January 55. In February 55, I was posted to the 1st Battalion in Iserlohn in Germany. I went out as a #1 brain gunner, and eventually became a driver, and came back in October 1956 with the battalion. We had in fact been earmarked to go to Suez, but that was stopped by the Americans, and we ended up in Strensall in York. The battalion was then earmarked for service in Cyprus, but because I'd opted out for my first 3 years, I didn't have enough residual service to go with them. Together with several others, we were transferred compulsory, we had no choice in the matter, and went to the King's Own Royal Regiment at Barnard Castle. I finished off my service in June 1957, and went home to a new wife, and there's only her, and returned to Civiston, fully intent on the purpose. I'd done my 3 years, I'd done my duty to Queen and country. I got demobbed. Over the next couple of years, things weren't too good on the employment situation. In fact, they got so bad, I said to my wife, this is it, I'm going back in the army. And on the 10th of August 1959, I re-enlisted into what was then the Royal Army Service Corps. And a few weeks later, in October 59, and in fact, if I remember right, it was the 14th of October, I was posted out to the Far East, as I thought, to Singapore. Oh yes, I saw Singapore for 2 days, but then they sent me up north, up country to northern Malaya, to a place called Ipoh. And spent the next 2.5 years there, and eventually my wife, and now of course a young daughter, arrived out there a few months later and joined me. The British government didn't call it a war, they called it an emergency, and it existed from 1948 to 1960. And because I'd gone there in 59 and was there in 60, I was part of it, a very, very minor part of it, because it was all closing down, and eventually, of course, the Malaysian government took over. because they got their, well, when I first went out there, I went out as a driver, all right, and occasionally we did transport fuel runs, right, to go and load helicopters with fuel, avgas, all right, and the helicopters were lifting Kiwi or New Zealanders and Australians into the jungle, all right, not only for training purposes, but to let these CTs, as they're called, know we were still around, and that was
CT?
communist terrorists. All right, and that was it. I was part of the support corps, right, rather than being an infantryman, and a year later posted out on a normal posting to Aden, down at the bottom end of the Red Sea. Again, terrorist activity. The Federation for the Liberation of South Yemen was one of them. Right, I just can't remember the name of the other two, but they were fighting amongst themselves, and they were having a go at us at the same time. But the government had decided that Aden was to close anyway, so they more or less waited. But there were tragic incidents out there. Fortunately, from a personal point of view, I wasn't involved. Right, but some of the Arabs mutinied in the Aden forces, right, and they killed a lot of the Royal Corps of Transport guys who were coming back from ranges. All right, they ambushed them. Right, but fortunately, I went out as a corporal, came back as a sergeant. Right, but I was chief clerk to the Little Aden Cantonment Camp staff. And with the camp commandant, there was a Major Newton who returned to UK on retirement, and I had a Major Parkinson, right, who came out afterwards, and I left after 2 years, right, because my tour of duty was up, right, and up to that point in my career, job-wise, it was the best posting I'd ever had. Right, but I wouldn't give you tuppence for 8. Very hot, very dry, and it didn't rain in the 2 years I was there. Right, you can, and there, again, this is purely a personal view, you can get sick and tired of brilliant sunshine. Right, no, or very few clouds, but the irony of this is that I came home in February '67. A few weeks later, my wife and I had a very good laugh because a monsoon rain had diverted from India and flooded Aden City. It didn't last long, but because they had no facilities for draining water away properly, right, they were flooded out, and I understand there was raw sewage in the street. Right, my wife and I had a good laugh about that.
So,
incident which I was slightly involved in because we were working tropical hours from 7 in the morning till 1 in the afternoon, and you had the rest of the day off, unless of course you were on duty. All right, my MT sergeant said to me, I was still corporal at the time, what are you doing this evening? I said, nothing in particular. He said, right, well, you drive the minibus down to RAF Kamaksa. The aircraft's coming in, families on board, and we've got a corporal going down to meet his wife and children. Cut a long story short, I took the minibus down, we picked up the corporal, his wife came off with a couple of children and a baby in arms. Right, and that was that night, and that was Monday night. Right, took them back to where their quarters were, took the minibus back, and went back home myself. And the following day, my MT sergeant came to me and said, what are you doing tomorrow afternoon? Nothing in particular. He said, we've got a funeral on. Right, I want you to drive the minibus. Okay, fair enough. So I drove the minibus. And that woman that had walked off with a newborn baby in her arms, I mean, it was only a matter of perhaps 6 weeks old. Right, we buried the baby that afternoon. Right, he died of pneumonia. as strange as it may seem, apparently pneumonia is one of the biggest killers in that part of the world. And that, it was tragic.
Yeah.
That's
If you had your time again, would you go back in, or would there be?
I'd go back tomorrow if they'd have me.